not only do you have to, like, from a specific, like, I guess it could apply to any sort of adversity or trauma, but you have to separate that energy and not just keep holding on to it, separate the stress, um, and then rebuild self-trust, through that introspection, learn what went well, what didn't. And that is an imperative part of the process if, yes, if you're going to make some long-term changes going forward.
Right, because sometimes whenever you do learn the lesson or whatever you've gained from it, right, resiliency lessons, part of that is what not to do. So the
Oh
best
yeah.
way to go through it is to go through it knowing that you're probably going to mess something up, but at least I'll try, right? I'm not perfect either. We all have areas of limitation. But on the other side, when you look back, it's like an evaluation of how you've done.
Welcome to the Resilient Minds podcast, stories of grit, growth, and success, where we dive deep into the journey of successful leaders who've struggled and succeeded. Before the wins, before the titles, what was the mindset behind the leader? On this show, we focus on real stories behind the success, the struggles, the resilience, and the courage it takes to keep moving forward, even when times get tough. My goal is to provide you with stories of hope and transformation, showing that no matter the challenges, there is a way forward. On this show, we'll be meeting with highly successful leaders who've battled through obstacles, emerging stronger and wiser on the other side. This show is for anyone who wants to grow, evolve, and find the light at the end of the tunnel. Everyone's a leader. So together, we'll uncover what it truly means to evolve as leaders, and ultimately, as human beings. This is Resilient Minds.
Hey, I am your host, Dr. Campbell, and I'm here with Shannon Smith. She is a serial entrepreneur and she is on a mission to do something that I am very passionate about, but discussing toxic workplace dynamics. And this always goes back into our childhood, our projections, our wounding, our traumas, but it's actually how it's playing itself out right now in the workplace. So thank you so much, Shannon, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Well, I appreciate your time. Can you explain to us what exactly you do to be able to get this word out to people?
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe I'll just kind of go back to sort of the origin story. I've been in sales, I've been in psychology, I've been in behavior change as it relates to organizations and people, lots of the executive coaching stuff. And when that little pandemic thingy happened in 2020, I don't know if you remember it, that was my introduction to the brain. Myself, I was not doing okay. I had just bought this 65-foot wooden boat, was living on Lake Union in Seattle, and it was a massive undertaking. I knew nothing about it. It was something I was supposed to have done with my partner. But my partner got stuck in Utah rehabbing a house. So he was supposed to do all of the systems that I didn't want to do, had no interest in learning how to do, but he was gone. So I was in this place where I was living on this aging boat. The power would go off randomly. I was trying to keep my consulting gig afloat the whole time. All the uncertainty, all the fear. I have severe asthma, so I didn't want to get COVID. I was like washing my vegetables when they came in from DoorDash. And I was drinking too much and I was spiraling. I was ruminating. I was in a really dark place, wasn't sleeping. And so I stumbled across The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Doidge.
Mhm.
And that opened a whole new path for me where I said, wow, if we only understand our brain, how much can we really impact the quality of our lives? And so that kicked me off on a year-long peer-reviewed scientific journal article research expedition into how the brain can help us if we just understand it and know how to apply the principles in our everyday to day. So I initially started with myself. I saw really good results. I then started in the space of habits, and I put about 30 people through my pilot program, they saw amazing results. From some just wanted to exercise more, go to like be healthier. Some wanted to procrastinate less. Some wanted to have less anxiety. And so we saw all of that. Like one guy even reported 90% reduction in anxiety. So I said, okay, this stuff really works. So applied it to the habits, and actually I have a mobile gaming app based in neuroscience research that changes your habits while you play. It's called Reboot Your Brain on Apple and Google if you want to check it out. And then I wanted to go back to my roots, which was leadership and sales. So now I've helped people in neuroscience and leadership. I help people close more sales using neuroscience. But now what I'm seeing is that companies really have the upper hand. They're not necessarily valuing their employees. They're just a line item on an Excel sheet after working there for 30 years. Or maybe there's a toxic component. Maybe they're stuck in a situation because the market is not great, especially in Seattle if you're in tech and you're wanting to find a new job. And so if you've got to hang on and you've got to provide that stability, maybe you have to sort of endure a toxic boss. And 87% of us have experienced a toxic boss. So I know that there's a lot of folks out there. So really what I'm trying to do now is bring that neuroscience to folks who might be stuck in that toxic boss situation to help them understand that they have a lot more power and control than they really believe.
Right. The what I hear when you say that is that you're setting people free by telling them what their innate power is because it's in their brain.
Yes, absolutely.
Have you ever experienced a time like yourself where you had a toxic boss or you were stuck in a situation you couldn't do anything about and you truly didn't see the way out? Like you didn't have the solution?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've had my share of toxic bosses. Like there was one instance I had, it was my first big girl job in a boutique consulting firm in Chicago. And I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and super excited to go there and impress everybody. And as part of the onboarding, one of them, well, the managing director took the small group of us around the company and sort of did a little onboarding. Then he brought us into his office and kind of was sitting down and chatting with us. And he was in the middle of this really compelling story, and I was engrossed and I was in it, you know? And all of a sudden, he stops, looks at me, and says, "Why do you have that stupid look on your face?"
Mm.
And I was 20, so I didn't have any of these skills at the time. But, you know, I had to make the decision, do I want to stay in this or am I like, yo, I'm out because that's too much. At the time I was 20, I was wanting to prove myself, and so I dug in and stayed.
Mm.
Nowadays, that would not happen. I had a client around a little bit before the pandemic where I had to prepare myself, and that's actually where a lot of these tactics came from, is me dealing with her. But yeah, unfortunately, I've had toxic bosses throughout my career. I think a lot of people have.
Right. When you're talking about a client that you had techniques come from, because it sounds like learned behavior and then you had the information, so you've created these techniques, right? What
Mhm.
was let's say one thing. What's a technique that somebody could use to assist themselves right now?
Sure. Well, so kind of how I frame this is there's 4 steps. And so the first step is really just understanding what happens so that you can prepare. And that is also just looking at your overall how you run your life. Because if you're up at 7 a.m. running until 9 p.m. at night, your nervous system doesn't have an opportunity to relax. And so it's going to be a lot more difficult to manage a toxic boss in that kind of situation. So, first is really just getting an awareness. The second part is preparing. So, what kind of sets off your toxic boss? What can you expect? What could you reasonably predict so that you can create little plans depending on the scenario? Execution is the third component, and an example or two from there would be engaging your peripheral vision. So, whenever you're so focused on something like that and you're feeling a threat, your amygdala is active, your insula, your prefrontal cortex isn't able to kick on. And so if you can just soften your gaze, notice the room edges, it kind of takes you out of that immediacy to where you're able to disconnect a little bit emotionally. And then the fourth step is recovery. What do you do after? But yeah, I've got tactics I can share more if you'd like, totally up to you.
Yeah, well, that's really helpful because what you're doing is you're teaching them to empower themselves over their own nervous system. And sometimes we don't even know when we go into fight or flight because we're dealing with somebody who's either being aggressive or they're intimidating. And who knows where that comes from? Like when I'm working with individuals, a lot of that comes from past stuff, our childhood wounding, our attachment wounds, our rejections, our failures. Those wounds live today in the nervous system. However, if I have somebody with, from my perspective, has authority over me, if they're upset at me and I feel like I'm pressured or I need to act a certain way or I need to do something specific, cortisol rushes through our system, right? And it biologically puts us into fight or flight. But if we're not aware of that and then we don't have the tools to pull us out of that, because some people don't even know what it looks like, feels like, and then how to get themselves out, because we can do that, then they just stay stuck,
Hmm.
right? And then they
Yeah.
actually don't perform as well anyways. And then they walk away upset because they should have said this or they should have acted like this or like they weren't even wrong in the situation. Why did they even let somebody talk to them that way? I'm sure
Yeah.
you see that a lot.
Yeah. I have. And it's funny because so many things in this life start with awareness. And if we're not aware, there's just absolutely nothing we can even do about it. It's the whole boiled frog thing. It's just slowly, maybe it creeps up on you. That's certainly what happened, not with the first example I gave you. That was kind of like a kabam, welcome. But the one later on with in big tech, that was definitely a boiled frog type of scenario.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Well, so this person and I had actually worked on a different project together as peers, and she decided that she wanted to be a full-time employee. I mean, that's great for her, go for it. And then later on, I was doing some consulting work for her organization. And, it started very much like where we left off, as peers. But gradually, it became more and more controlling. There was certainly micromanagement. So, for instance, at one point, she'd asked me, how much time did this take me, not even my team? Because at that point, I had taken on so much extra work to try to please her from my team. But I said 7 minutes and she had a conniption. So, that wasn't right out of the gate. If it were, I probably would have opted out of that contract, but we were already so far in and I had already hired people for this contract. I, as an owner, felt stuck from being able just to walk out. I felt like I owed my team to stay. So from that, I started implementing some of the techniques. Like I knew when there was a big deadline coming up, or if there was a high visibility piece of work, I was going to get that toxicity ramped up on me. And so, I prepared by knowing what triggered her, setting some intentions for myself, um, trying to lower that cortisol as setting sort of a baseline for where I was from my nervous system component level, and then the execution of it. I had always 3 or 4 tactics in my back pocket that I could throw out there to help me to be able to constantly respond instead of react.
Right. So it empowers you to act how you want to because you've prepared. So in the moment, it's not so hard.
Right,
What
right.
do you think
And then after that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
go ahead, you ahead.
I was just going to say, and then after that, it's important too, to give yourself a little care recovery because, it is perceived as a threat what's happening to you with a toxic boss. And so, you said, oh, I just think about what I should have said. It's like in the shower, I have the greatest comebacks, right? But if you can interrupt that replay loop, like the brain lock is what I call it, that is going to help you because that loop is just not helping anybody. If you find a way to discharge that built up stress, maybe you go to the gym, maybe you run, maybe you walk your dog, whatever, but finding a way to recover, I talk with my hands a lot, whenever you go through something stressful like that is also super important.
Right. And I find too, whether it's myself when I work with clients or just hearing stories about the way people process information, the way our biology is designed is we have way more clarity in our mind when our body is calm. So if we're trying to figure things out or see it clearly when we're still upset, that's another reason why we need to decompress and do some self-care so that our body just completely calms, so our mind opens back up, so when we do go through the scenario, we see it a whole lot more clearly. Because if we're still upset, we're probably not seeing very clearly, whether it's them or whether it's us. So it also goes into accountability.
Yeah, totally agree. I agree with everything you just said there.
When it comes to you personally, because it takes a lot of strength to one, see this, like see a problem and then charge towards it with a solution, right? Because then you have to implement your new solution. When it comes to, some people fight back. They may not want to take accountability, or the system might not want to change, right? So it takes a lot of grit. What do you think has built your confidence or your grit to make you feel confident and strong enough to be able to take on this task?
Yeah. Well, couple things I can pull from. You're talking specifically about the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, which is one of the rarest parts of the brain because it only really has one function, which is the tenacity. And the short story, the short tip here as to how anyone can improve their tenacity is to do things they don't want to do.
Mm.
Like I don't like to run. I mean, I haven't been running. I'm not going to run because that's not something I want to do. I'll beef up my tenacity in other ways, but running would be a great way to beef up my tenacity because I really, really hate it.
Right.
Um, so that is something very simple that anyone can do. What has helped me to create more of a tenacious sort of persona for me over the years, tons of setbacks, in this life. I don't believe we're here just to, eat bonbons and chill. I think we're here to learn, evolve, be challenged, and that only comes through adversity. In fact, there's a really fun study, and then I'll get to some of the things that have happened in my own life, but there's a really fun study where they tried to understand exactly what causes resilience. And of course, it involves rats. And I'll just say they did some not very nice things to rats. But what they found was those who had no adversity also had no resilience. They weren't able to bounce back. And so, if you want to sort of tie this to people, maybe think of people who are trust fund babies. And, if there's a problem, daddy fixes it, that kind of thing. Those folks are not resilient. Conversely, if you go to the other side of the scale, people who have had so much trauma, so much adversity that they just can't even function anymore. That's different because they are so overwhelmed, they're not able to be resilient. The sweet spot is in the middle where there's some adversity. We've been able to overcome it. And each time we do that, we're able to increase our resilience.
Right.
Uh, yeah. So personally, let's see. I mean, I moved out at 17. I kind of didn't like to be told what to do. So I
No.
found my own way. I actually drove back to high school my last semester, graduated early, got the heck out of there. I put myself through 4 degrees. Um, by the way, I can officially say I think formal education is a little overrated, but that's a whole different discussion. Um, Moved out to Seattle. I've had multiple businesses that have been well and successful, overcome a lot of personal adversity as well. So there's a little flavor of it.
What do you think is the hardest thing that you've had to overcome out of everything?
Um, I'm kind of going back to, I mean, there was that that boutique consulting firm job, that one was really, really tough.
Mm.
That managing director really just set the tone, and it was like that all the time. Um, Personally, I would say losing people I love. My grandmother was a big force in my life. I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but I also just lost my dog of 13 years. That one was a gut punch. It's amazing how much soul and just goodness animals have. Just, they're like pure forces of unconditional love. Um, I've also had some relationships, some personal relationships, romantic relationships that have done some damage, gave me a great opportunity to be resilient. It's impacted, my stability, really, the financial stability. So there are a lot from which to choose. Also living on that 65-foot wooden old boat was an obstacle. I did not want to learn the heating systems. I did not want to learn the black water systems. I did not want to mess with the generator or any of that. No, I don't want to do any of that. I just want to be on the boat. I'll help a little bit, but I don't want to do all those systems. So more of doing things I don't want to do.
Right. And earlier you had mentioned not only experiencing those things, but recovering from them. And I've
Mhm,
experienced that as well as, the individuals that I've worked with. Like just because you have trauma and you've had adversity doesn't mean that you've actually built the tenacity, the resiliency. Because if it's
mhm.
suppressed, you're actually the emotional landmines still live in the body, and then the
Yeah.
brain gets locked up and it closes those areas. It dissociates the bigger the defense barriers. So you're closing yourself out of your own brain by not actually diving into it, organizing it, better understanding it, releasing the emotion, not suppressing them, but releasing means you feel them. But then on the other end, that's what builds the tenacity or the resiliency muscle. So that the people
Mhm.
that I've seen that are the most resilient, they've actually been the ones that done the work.
Yeah. I totally agree with all of that. There is sort of a introspection, sort of closing piece that has to happen. Not only do you have to, like, from a specific, like, I guess it could apply to any sort of adversity or trauma, but you have to separate that energy and not just keep holding on to it, separate the stress, um, and then rebuild self-trust, through that introspection, learn what went well, what didn't. And that is an imperative part of the process if, yes, if you're going to make some long-term changes going forward.
Right, because sometimes whenever you do learn the lesson or whatever you've gained from it, right, resiliency lessons, part of that is what not to do. So the
Oh
best
yeah.
way to go through it is to go through it knowing that you're probably going to mess something up, but at least I'll try, right? I'm not perfect either. We all have areas of limitation. But on the other side, when you look back, it's like an evaluation of how you've done.
Hmm.
What do you think
Yeah.
now, before we have to hop off, what do you think is the most important thing for you in order for you to stay on your game and calm in your body, clear in your mind, and still performing at your peak while still taking care of yourself? What does that look like?
Hmm. Well, I don't know if you can see, first things first, nature. I've got to be in a nature right now. I'm living in a house that is technically door to door an hour from Seattle, but it's in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I don't know if you can see out the window, but I'm secluded, and I love that.
Yeah.
I may be in the process of becoming a hermit. Um, Meditation every day. I have, at least in the past year, been doing a little bit of meditation every day. I'm starting to get longer and longer. And speaking of science, there are about a bajillion studies out there that show the long-term impacts of meditation, that are beneficial. Like, one that's coming to mind is, I think it was done by Harvard, where they had an MRI machine They put the person in there like as a pre-post. What does your brain look like? Then 8 weeks later, after 8 weeks of meditation every day, what does the brain activity look like? And I saw the amygdala was deactivated. And that is the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn component. It also has some pleasure principles and some other things. But that is the thing where it's like, are you a threat? Are you a threat? Am I safe? Constantly. And so it was less activated after 8 weeks, I think it was, of meditation. So nature, meditation, and then connection for me. I do go into Seattle once or twice a week, and I'm around people that I really love. So, or maybe I call my family's back in Kansas City on the phone. I have that level of connection. So, connection, nature, and meditation for me.
Right. Absolutely. And I would agree with all three of those as well for myself. When you were talking about that study, I do believe they were talking about like not only of it being less activated, the amygdala, but it's smaller too.
Yeah,
And you're talking about the fire alarm part of your brain that needs to calm down when you're talking to people. It needs, if you're being chased by a lion, absolutely, it needs to be, very active and engaged. But when you're talking to people, if they're not actually trying to hurt you, we need to know the difference, right? And so when
right.
we don't have control over our own amygdala, then, or at least be mindful of it. There is a book, because you had mentioned the one before, and I'd love to hear the title and the author because I read that book as well. It's
Oh,
an amazing book, but one that I think you and the listeners would like. It's by Andrew Newberg, and I think he talks about that study as well. But the book is called How Enlightenment Changes Your Brain. Fascinating.
ooh,
What was the one? I
yeah.
don't remember the author, but it was How Your Brain Changes Itself or something.
Yeah, it was The Brain That Changes Yourself by Norman Deutsch.
Which, yes, I read
Lots of studies in there.
several years ago and had the same response. I was like, this is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, our brains are super fascinating. And just to go back to that point you were talking about, the amygdala, I don't know who it was. It was in a book somewhere, and he had written a couple really good books. But basically, he described the amygdala as a runaway horse and you're the rider, and you can't control the runaway horse if your amygdala is leading the team. Whereas whenever you have control over it and you're able to calm, you are a trained rider
Mm,
who, does the jumping, and I don't know what all the horse activity names are, but it's like trotting carefully and it looks like it's dancing. So it's like amygdala is a runaway horse whenever it's in control. Whenever you have control of your system, you have a trained horse at your disposal.
absolutely. And it's incredibly powerful when you, especially because what you were talking about with the meditation, doing your self-care, it's not necessarily only for after an event to decompress, right? If you get stressed out, absolutely do meditation, go out in the woods or, whatever it is for us to decompress. But it's prep work so that you can
Hmm.
condition yourself to be more calm and be more grounded. So when things do come up that cause stress, you're not as affected.
Absolutely. If the work isn't done beforehand, it's going to be very difficult to respond instead of react in the moment. And I mean, one of the first things I've noticed is some of the people who have come to me about toxic bosses, they've designed their life to where it's constant chaos.
Mhm.
And it's going to be very difficult to find some peace in a chaotic, traumatic, adverse situation with your boss if everything else is always chaos too.
Right.
So that's kind of the first step for folks is that preparation.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate your time today. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, sure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. See you soon.
Thank you so much for joining. Your time and your focus are your most valuable currencies, so thank you for giving that to us today. Our guest contact information will be in the description below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. But please, if you know someone who's struggling, stop right now and send this video to them. The struggle behind growth and success is real, and they need the support to make it, because the strongest minds are the ones that healed. So don't forget, lead louder, feel deeper, and stay resilient. Until next time, this is your host, Dr. Campbell, on the Resilient Minds podcast.